Drop the hay and put your hands where I can see them. That was the first thing I heard at sunrise, before coffee, before chores, before I'd even rubbed the sleep out of my eyes. I froze mid-lift, clutching a 40-pound hay bale, and slowly turned toward the voice. There she stood, Marjorie Blake, the self-crowned ruler of the Sunset Ridge HOA, wearing pearls, a sun hat, and holding a turquoise taser like she was leading a federal raid. Behind her, 3 SUV-mounted HOA patrol volunteers spread out on my dirt road, puffing their chests in matching polos and cheap metal badges that looked like they came from a Halloween store. "Cole Matthews," Marjorie barked, "you are being detained for non-compliance, unauthorized livestock, and an unresolved aesthetic violation." I blinked. This wasn't a suburb, this was my ranch, 15 miles outside their precious neighborhood. Yet somehow they were acting like they had jurisdiction, like they had power. They didn't know it yet. But before the day was over, the real police would surround them instead. Before we dive deeper, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you love HOA chaos stories, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. I've always believed a man earns his peace. Some people chase it across state lines, some find it at the bottom of a fishing boat. Me, I found mine the day I left Albuquerque and bought 80 acres of stubborn desert soil in Red Butte County, New Mexico. The land wasn't pretty at first, just brittle sagebrush, a half-collapsed barn, and a windmill creaking like it regretted being born, but it was mine. Every acre, every fence post, every sunrise, and after 20 years of living elbow to elbow with nosy neighbors and street-level HOA tyrants, owning a place where I could breathe without being fined felt almost holy. Funny how fast holy things can be disturbed. I never imagined peace could be interrupted by a woman in pearls carrying a turquoise taser, but life's taught me that chaos rarely sends a warning letter. If it had, the return address would have said Sunset Ridge Estates HOA, a subdivision 15 miles east, run by the kind of people who hold meetings about mailbox colors and call the police if you install a wind chime louder than a whisper. But before I ever saw Marjorie Blake on my property, before her HOA patrol rolled up like they were reenacting a budget version of Cops, the warnings had already started. Little things at first, a flyer tucked under my windshield wiper while I was grocery shopping in town, a bright, glossy pamphlet explaining the vision for the future of Sunset Ridge, complete with cartoon cacti smiling beside perfectly trimmed lawns, and then the kicker, a welcome packet addressed to new resident, Sunset Ridge Phase 4 Scenic Pasture Overlay District. I remember sitting at my kitchen table holding that ridiculous envelope, laughing so hard Dixie, the most dramatic goat on this side of the Rio Grande, ran up bleeding like I was in danger. Scenic Pasture Overlay District, I muttered. That's a new one. But laughter stopped the moment I opened it. Inside were HOA membership forms, a rule book thicker than a Bible, and a map with so many neon highlighter marks it looked like a kindergarten art project. And there, circled in glittery pink gel pen, was my ranch. At first, I shrugged it off. People draw crazy things all the time, sometimes with crayons. And HOAs, they're masters at pretending they own more than they do. Sunset Ridge had no legal claim to anything outside its platted subdivision. Their rules stopped where their pavement stopped. That was supposed to be the end of that. Then came the day Marjorie Blake herself drove up my dirt road in a spotless white SUV that was too shiny to survive in real country. She stepped out wearing a floral blouse, oversized sunglasses, and carrying a clipboard thick enough to be a weapon. I was fixing a broken hinge on the goat pen when she approached like she was arriving to inaugurate a new shopping mall. "Good afternoon," she chirped. "I'm here to welcome you to Sunset Ridge Estates." I blinked. "Ma'am, I'm not in Sunset Ridge Estates." She smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Oh, but you are, or will be. We've expanded the community boundary to include all land within the Scenic Pasture Overlay District." I stared at her. "That's not a real thing?" She lifted the clipboard. "According to this map, it is." The map looked familiar, too familiar. It was the same highlighter explosion I'd received in the mail, only this one had been laminated like she expected it to survive a hurricane. My ranch, barns, goat pens, and even my windmill were circled and labeled with HOA jargon. She pointed at my property line with manic enthusiasm. "Your ranch is now part of our extended neighborhood family," she declared, "which means you'll need to comply with our community standards." I almost laughed again. "Ma'am, The nearest one of your houses is 15 miles away. Proximity is subjective, she replied. No, it really isn't. Her smile tightened, one of those micro-expressions that tells you a person isn't used to hearing the word no. Well, we're offering you the privilege of joining our HOA, she said. It comes with many benefits. Does it come with leaving me alone? Her sunglasses slid down her nose. Excuse me, I wiped sweat off my brow. Lady, this is a ranch. My ranch. The law says HOAs can only enforce rules within their subdivision. Nothing here has anything to do with Sunset Ridge. She stiffened. Our bylaws allow annexation for aesthetic preservation. That's not how bylaws work. She didn't like that answer. Marjorie left that day with a pinched expression and a promise I didn't take seriously at the time. Non-compliance will be addressed. I figured she'd get bored, find someone with mismatched Christmas lights to terrorize, and move on. But some people don't let things go, especially people who believe clipboards are instruments of divine authority. Soon enough, strange things started happening around the ranch. A couple of HOA members, people I'd never seen before, drove slowly along my fence line, taking pictures like my goats were fugitives. Dixie, naturally, head-butted the fence every time she saw them. Good girl. Then came the letter. A formal notice claiming my livestock density exceeded the allowable threshold for community harmony. The envelope had a Sunset Ridge return address. The problem? I wasn't part of their community. I didn't even want to be within binocular distance of their community. I called the county office. They laughed. They're trying that annexation nonsense again. Ignore it. So I did. Until the morning Marjorie came back. It was late spring, the kind of crisp morning where the sky feels too big and the earth smells like sun-warmed soil. I was out feeding the goats. Dixie was already plotting mischief. My chores were simple: hay, water, check the fence, maybe repair a loose board if one of the goats got ideas overnight. That's when the breeze dropped, the birds stopped, and I heard the crunch of multiple tires on gravel. I turned to see, not one, but 3 HOA vehicles, a pair of white SUVs with magnetic HOA Patrol logos slapped on the doors, and a golf cart being towed behind like it was part of some bizarre parade. The doors opened in unison, and out stepped Marjorie, flanked by 2 men wearing discount store tactical belts and bright blue polos. One of them carried a clipboard like it was a badge of office. The other held a laminated rulebook the size of a dictionary. Marjorie marched up my drive with the confidence of someone who's never been told she's wrong in her entire life. She pointed her clipboard at my barn like she was inspecting a crime scene. Mr. Matthews, she announced, your structures are in clear violation of Sunset Ridge standards. I raised a brow. Still not part of Sunset Ridge. She ignored that. Your goats have been observed engaging in hostile behavior. That's their default setting. And your scarecrow is intimidating. That's intentional. She closed her eyes, inhaled like she was centering her soul, and then said the words that would end any hope of rational conversation. I am giving you your final warning. I leaned on the fence. About what? Compliance. I couldn't help laughing. Marjorie, you have no jurisdiction here. She stepped closer, smile polished until it shined like chrome. Not yet. That line, right there, that was when I realized I had a real problem on my hands. A woman with no authority and too much ambition can be dangerous. A woman with an HOA rulebook and delusions of regional power. That's a whole different category of threat. I didn't know it then, but the stunt she pulled next would turn my quiet ranch into the center of the strangest war Red Butte County had ever seen. I was halfway through, repairing a loose gate hinge the next morning, when I heard tires crunching over gravel again. Too many tires. Too close together. Out here, visitors come one at a time. Anything more than that is either a family reunion or a problem. And I wasn't expecting relatives. I wiped my hands on my jeans and looked up just as a caravan of county sheriff vehicles rolled slowly around the bend, dust swirling behind them like ghost trails in the morning sun. For half a second, I thought maybe Deputy Ray was just swinging by for a check-in, but the sight of 3 sheriff vehicles, an ATV, and a 4th unmarked truck told me otherwise, and then I saw the real source of trouble. There, standing smack in the center of my driveway, with arms folded over her chest like she was presiding over Judgment Day, was Marjorie Blake. She wasn't wearing her usual pastel color scheme today. No, this time she came dressed for war. Her outfit included a bright crimson sash with gold letters stitched across it that read, regional compliance commander. Where she bought that, I do not know. Probably a craft shop that didn't ask questions. Behind her stood the rest of her self-appointed HOA patrol, looking like they'd been dragged reluctantly into battle. One of them, Gary, had a limp, probably courtesy of Dixie's warm greeting the day before. Another man clutched a clipboard to his chest like it was a bulletproof vest. Before I could even speak, I caught sight of Deputy Ray stepping out of the lead sheriff SUV. His jaw was clenched, his hat was low, his eyes were already telling me he was tired of this nonsense. I gave him a subtle nod. "Mornin', Ray." He gave me one right back. "Mornin', Cole." Marjorie spun around the moment she saw him, pointing dramatically at me like she was reenacting a courtroom scene in a bad TV show. "That's him, officers," she declared. "That is the man who assaulted me with livestock, defied HOA protocol, and continues to harbor multiple active violations." Ray blinked once, slowly. "Ma'am, we went over this yesterday." She lifted one manicured hand. "Protocol has changed. I am now acting under expanded jurisdiction." "This isn't your jurisdiction," Ray said, voice flat as desert rock. She reached into a tote bag embroidered, of course, and pulled out a rolled document sealed with a sticker shaped like a cactus. With a flourish rivaling a royal decree, she unfurled a massive poster-sized map across the hood of Ray's cruiser. "This," she announced, "is the revised master map for Sunset Ridge Estates. As you can see," she traced a finger over what looked like a rainbow explosion. "District boundaries now include all properties within a 5-mile radius of any home where a resident has subscribed to the community newsletter." I stared at her. "So because someone 5 miles away clicked the wrong email, you think you own my ranch?" Marjorie nodded confidently. "Digital engagement is legally binding under subsection." She flipped through her stack of laminated papers. Under subsection something," she said, quieting slightly as she shuffled faster. Then, like fate itself was mocking her, a paper slipped from her hand and fluttered to the ground. Ray bent down to pick it up. He glanced at it, flipped it over, and held it up so everyone could see. "Ma'am," he said, "this is a chick fill. A coupon." Marjorie snatched it back with the desperation of someone rescuing a priceless artifact. "Misfiled. Clerical sabotage. Irrelevant." Gary lifted another paper gingerly, trying to help. "This one says buy one get one half off mulch," he whispered. "Gary," she snapped, making him jump so hard his clipboard nearly flew away. Another deputy, one of the younger ones, leaned toward Ray. "Is this for real? As real as a unicorn in a pawn shop," Ray muttered. But Marjorie wasn't done. Her eyes snapped toward the goat pen, where Dixie, perched atop an overturned bucket like a furry mountain queen, stared right back. "That animal," Marjorie hissed, "assaulted my husband yesterday." Gary cleared his throat. "I'm not her husband. Not now, Gary." I crossed my arms, suppressing a laugh. "You walked onto her territory. She simply exercised her right to stand her, hoof." Marjorie ignored me. "I am invoking Article 7, stand your lawn." Ray blinked. "What in the hell is stand your lawn?" "It is our right," Marjorie intoned, "to defend community standards from hostile architecture, rogue livestock, and excessive porch decor, right on cue." A gust of wind rustled the wind chimes hanging from my porch, old welded horseshoes that clanged like a rustic symphony. Marjorie flinched like they'd insulted her mother. "See," she gasped, "hostile decor." I had to rub my face to hide the smile. "Lady, that scrap metal tied with fishing line. It's menacing. It jingles. It's a threat." At that exact moment, Dixie leapt off her bucket with startling grace, her hooves kicking up sand like tiny dust grenades. She bolted forward in a perfect arc, performed a 180-degree slide, and slammed her shoulder right into Marjorie's knees. The clipboard went flying. Papers scattered. Marjorie collapsed onto the gravel with a shriek. The young deputy's jaw dropped. Gary simply sat down where he stood, resigned to his fate. I swear, even the wind paused to observe the spectacle. Ray walked over slowly, brushing hay off Marjorie's hat as he helped her back to her feet. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I'm going to ask you one last time to leave this property voluntarily. If you don't, we'll be filing an official trespass report, and your HOA shade is going to turn into real legal trouble real quick." Marjorie didn't respond. She lifted her chin, straightened her sash, and glared at me like I'd personally violated the Geneva Convention. Then she turned on her heel, marched back to the HOA SUV, and then, inexplicably, climbed onto the roof. "We will not be moved," she declared from the top of her vehicle. "We are staging a peaceful protest against goat tyranny." My jaw dropped. "What? Gary? Get the signs." Gary staggered to the SUV and opened the trunk, pulling out a stack of poster boards with slogans like, "Mow lawns, less freedom, goat-free is the way to be," and my personal favorite, "Make scary crows friendly again." Ray sighed so hard I thought he might pass out. "Cole," he muttered, "you want this to be official?" "Yeah," I said, "let's make it official." Ray turned to his deputies. "Get the cones." They set up a perimeter of orange cones around the HOA protesters, currently consisting of Marjorie, Gary, and a cardboard cutout of a bald eagle holding a HOA pamphlet. It looked like the saddest hostage situation in history. Ray radioed the incident in. Marjorie screeched that she was being silenced by tyranny. Gary apologized to everyone within earshot. Dixie trotted by proudly holding someone's visor in her mouth. By sunset, Ray had filed the trespassing citation. Marjorie was escorted off the property by 2 deputies. Gary somehow ended up wearing a traffic cone as a hat, and, in the official incident log, Dixie was described as temporarily disruptive but undeniably majestic. The HOA left defeated, dusty, and disorganized, but not broken. As the last patrol vehicle sputtered down my road, Ray gave me a long look. "You know she's not done, right?" I nodded slowly. "Oh, I know." Dixie stood beside me, chewing on a protest sign like it was breakfast. "And next time," I said, staring out toward the dusky horizon, "she'll come back with a bigger plan." That night, the desert felt too quiet, not peaceful quiet, in the way the air goes still before a dust storm tears across the plains. Even the goats sensed it. They stayed close to the barn, huddled like they were waiting for something to descend from the sky. And to be honest, after dealing with Marjorie Blake twice in 48 hours, I wouldn't have been surprised if she tried to parachute in with a megaphone. I'd finished repairing the chicken coop door, put away my tools, and settled onto my porch swing with a late-night beer. Dixie lay stretched at my feet, chewing rhythmically on someone's confiscated HOA lanyard. The moon was high, washing the desert in silver, light, gentle, and steady. For a moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, the chaos had passed. Then I heard it, a faint buzzing, mechanical, high-pitched. At first, it sounded like cicadas, but cicadas don't move in formation, and cicadas definitely don't bob up and down behind the ridgeline. Each one wearing a tiny blinking headlamp. I stood, squinting toward the horizon. Headlights, 6 of them cresting the hill. Not full-size headlights, smaller, lower to the ground, slow-moving, golf carts, 6 HOA golf carts. I blinked in disbelief, but nope, there they were, 6 of them in a perfect line, each adorned with flags, streamers, and laminated HOA logos flapping proudly in the wind. The whole parade looked like someone had taken a 4th of July block party and weaponized it. The lead cart moved slightly faster than the rest, bumping and wobbling across the uneven dirt like it was struggling to understand why no one had paved the desert. Standing at the front of it, actually standing in the cart, was Marjorie Blake, megaphone in hand, eyes blazing like she'd been up all night chugging iced tea and plotting revolution. Before I could even shout a warning, her voice blasted across the ranch. "Cole Matthews, you have been served a final HOA notice." Dixie jerked upright and bleated in protest. The golf carts pulled into a semicircle directly in front of my barn, an intimidating gesture if it weren't executed by vehicles usually seen at retirement communities. The HOA patrol piled out. More of them this time, maybe 10 total. They wore matching khaki shorts, polo shirts, and laminated badges that read, "Patrol Unit, Sunset Ridge." Some held clipboards, some held tape measures. One had a paint swatch booklet, like he expected to renovate my barn in the next 5 minutes. Gary was among them, driving the second cart. He looked exhausted, his visor crooked, his eyes silently pleading for rescue. "Evenin', Gary," I called. He lifted a hand. "I'm so sorry." Marjorie raised her megaphone. "This ranch," she declared dramatically, "is now officially designated as Sunset Ridge North Annex." I rubbed my temples. "Lady, no, it isn't. It falls under the Aesthetic Preservation Emergency Clause," she continued, ignoring me entirely. "That's not a real clause. It is when I declare it." Her patrol cheered weakly, the way middle managers do when forced into motivational seminars. Then, like a rehearsed Broadway routine, they scattered. A handful of them marched to my barn and began measuring it height, width, color saturation. One of them walked around the windmill, taking pictures from every angle like he was documenting evidence for a trial. Another knelt by my water trough and dipped in a test strip, probably checking if my livestock water met HOA hydration standards. The boldest one stapled a sign right onto the beam of my porch: "Welcome to Sunset Ridge, North Annex. A lawful life awaits." I ripped it down so fast I nearly got a splinter. A woman in sunglasses gasped like I'd committed a felony. "That is destruction of HOA property. It's my porch." "Not anymore." I stepped closer. "Say that again," she swallowed. In theory." Marjorie strode past me. Megaphone lowered but still switched on, so every breath she took echoed like Darth Vader. "This ranch," she announced to her followers, "is in dire need of beautification. That barn violates rusticity limits by at least 20%. "Rusticity isn't a word," I replied. "It is now." I exhaled hard. "You're out of your mind." She ignored me and pointed toward my scarecrow old jeans, flannel shirt, cowboy hat, the works. "Remove that hostile figure immediately." "That's my old work shirt. It's projecting aggression. It's a scarecrow." "Exactly." Meanwhile, Dixie had wandered into the middle of the scene, staring in wonder at the chaos unfolding before her. One of the HOA members tried to shoo her away. She responded by headbutting the man's clipboard with a force that echoed through the entire ranch. He fell backward, flailing like a turtle on its shell. Dixie pranced away proudly. I pulled out my phone and started filming. This wasn't just ridiculous, it was strategic. I needed evidence. And something told me this wasn't going to end here. That instinct proved true when I caught sight of a beige van parked behind the tree line. The windows were tinted, a massive HOA magnet was slapped on the side, a surveillance van. Curiosity got the best of me. I walked over, Dixie following at my heels, like a furry shadow. Before I could knock, the side door slid open. Inside sat a teenage boy wearing a Sunset Ridge hoodie, holding a headset in one hand and a bag of Cheetos in the other. "Oh," he said casually. "You're the goat guy." I blinked. "What are you doing on my land?" He shrugged. "Karen, Marjorie paid me to livestream violations to the HOA TikTok page. Says it boosts community engagement." I stared at him in stunned silence. "Kid, this isn't a community." He shrugged again. "Pays $10 an hour." I walked back to the house in a daze. I needed a plan. And coffee. And possibly a flamethrower. But the sheriff would probably frown on that. By morning, the HOA's occupation had escalated. They'd installed a small slice of white picket fence at the edge of my pasture, complete with a sign that said, "Future site of HOA, welcome fountain." Someone had set up a lawn chair command post. One woman graded the emotional approachability of my welcome mat. She gave it a 3 out of 10. That was when something inside me snapped. Not anger, not fear, just a quiet, stubborn resolve. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. But on my terms, I walked to the goat pen, crouched down, and whispered to Dixie, "Time for some diplomacy." She bleated. I posted a slow-motion video of her kicking over an HOA sign, added dramatic music, and captioned it, "The Great Goat Rebellion Begins. Number no HOA zone, number goat freedom." Within an hour, it had 10,000 views. By afternoon, people were driving out to support us locals, ranchers, HOA survivors, teenagers with protest signs. Someone brought snacks for the goats. Someone else brought a homemade flag with Dixie's face on it. A news van arrived. When the reporter asked who was in charge, Marjorie practically dove into the camera frame. But the reporter took one look at her sash, her golf carts, and the chaos she'd unleashed, and then turned straight to me. "So, you're the landowner?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, and those are your goats." "They sure are." "And you're not part of this HOA?" "Nope, never have been, never will be." She nodded approvingly and said, "We'll start the interview with you." Marjorie nearly fainted. By nightfall, my ranch had become something new, something unexpected. People called it Goatia online. And as I stood on the porch watching the crowd cheer Dixie like she was the hero of a revolution, I knew two things for certain. This wasn't over. And for the first time since Marjorie showed up with her clipboard and chaos, the tide was turning in our favor. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, a habit burned into me by years of ranch work, but for once, the world outside didn't feel calm or predictable. Even from my bedroom window, I could sense it, that strange, electric hum in the air that always comes before something goes sideways. The goats felt it too. They weren't scattered around as usual, they were pressed against the barn door, ears tilted toward the road like they were waiting for trouble. I brewed a pot of coffee, stepped onto the porch, and scanned the landscape. Nothing. Just quiet desert, streaks of gold breaking over the hills, and dust hanging soft in the cool morning breeze. The kind of morning that usually washes your worries away. Not today. I didn't trust the quiet anymore. Not after Marjorie escalated from pamphlets to protests in a single week. I knew she wasn't done. People like her don't stop when they lose. They double down and drag everyone around them into the fallout. I took a slow sip of coffee, thinking I needed proof, real, undeniable, court-level proof that the HOA had crossed every imaginable line. The videos of Dixie launching herself into clipboards were a good start, but I knew this mess was about to get worse. And messy HOA drama is one thing, a coordinated attempt to annex private land is another. I decided to drive into Red Butte and stop by the sheriff's substation. Deputy Ray might roll his eyes at me, but at least he'd listen. I didn't even make it halfway to my truck. I heard an engine, then several, low rumbling, growing louder. Coming down the dusty road that cut through the ranch, I stepped off the porch. Dixie trotted beside me like my furry lieutenant. As the engines grew louder, a second sound joined them, the metallic clatter of trailers being pulled, the squeak of something unoiled, and a faint but unmistakable crackle. Radios. Radios don't belong on a ranch unless law enforcement or emergency crews are involved, or unless someone is pretending to be law enforcement. I moved to the gate, heart tightening with every second. Then the convoy appeared rolling slowly around the bend like a parade from the seventh circle of hell. But this wasn't just golf carts and HOA SUVs this time. This was a full-blown, improvised patrol unit. Leading the pack was a dark gray pickup with flashing amber lights strapped to the roof. Behind it came two white SUVs, the same ones from before, a modified utility cart with a siren that must have been stolen from a kid's Halloween costume, and God help me, a rented flatbed hauling what looked like a foldable command tent. And standing proudly on the bed of that truck, hair whipping in the wind, sash glimmering in the early light. Marjorie, she had a bullhorn this time. A bullhorn. "Attention, residents of the Sunset Ridge North Annex," she announced. Despite there being only one resident and him not being part of Sunset Ridge or its annex, north or otherwise, the HOA patrol is commencing a full compliance sweep. I closed my eyes for half a second to center myself. When I opened them again, the convoy had completely overtaken my driveway. HOA patrol members hopped out like they'd rehearsed it. There must have been 20 of them, all wearing matching khaki shorts, dark green shirts embroidered with S, R, Patrol Unit, and metal badges pinned to their collars. Not stickers this time, real metal. Someone had invested money into this. Gary climbed out of the third vehicle, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He carried a pile of zip ties and looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him. "Morning, Gary," I said. He cleared his throat miserably. I tried to resign. "What happened?" she said. "HOA duty is a calling. Sounds cultish." He nodded sadly. "It feels cultish." I patted his shoulder. "Hang in there." Marjorie marched toward me, bullhorn still in hand, voice bouncing off the barn. "Cole Matthews, you are now under emergency HOA detention." I choked on my coffee. "Come again." She unfolded a laminated sheet with a decorative border. "This is an emergency detention order issued under Article 14C, critical threats to community harmony. That's not a law. It is in the Scenic Pasture Overlay District." I laughed so hard I doubled over. "Lady, that district exists only in your imagination." She raised her chin. "You leave me no choice. Patrol unit, secure the subject." 4 HOA members rushed forward and grabbed my arms. They touched me. They actually put hands on me. I wasn't scared. Not exactly. More stunned. You prepare yourself for many things in life. Fires, injuries, dealing with government employees, but nothing prepares you for the moment when a suburban HOA patrol tries to physically detain you on your own land. "Let go," I said calmly. One of them tightened the zip tie around my wrist. I exhaled once through my nose, loud and slow. The kind of exhale a man does when he's seconds from snapping. Dixie let out a low, murderous bleat. Then something happened, something so perfect it might have been divine intervention. A sound split the air, not the wind, not the goats, not the HOA bullhorn. Sirens. Real sirens. Not HOA sirens that sound like a sick bicycle horn, but real, deep, official law enforcement sirens. They echoed across the valley, growing louder, closer, until they roared into the driveway from both directions simultaneously. Sheriff's cruisers, 2 state trooper sedans, Ray in the lead car, lights flashing like Christmas. They surrounded the HOA convoy in a perfect semicircle, engines low and steady. The HOA patrol froze. Froze. Hands up, eyes wide, mouths open. You'd think they'd run drills for this exact moment, how to look guilty in under 2 seconds. The deputies stepped out, hands resting on their holsters, not drawn, but ready. Sheriff Hall himself approached, broad-shouldered and slow-moving, the kind of man who doesn't need to raise his voice because the world quiets for him. "Morning, Cole," he said. "Morning." "Sheriff," he turned to Marjorie. "Ma'am, we need to have a conversation." Marjorie's bullhorn trembled in her hand. "Sheriff, you are interfering with an active HOA compliance operation." "Ma'am," he said, tone flat as desert stone, "you and your people are impersonating law enforcement, trespassing, and attempting unlawful detention." Gasps rippled through the HOA patrol. Gary sank onto the tailgate like he'd been shot. That's incorrect," Marjorie sputtered. "We are exercising our right to defend community standards." The sheriff took her laminated badge, squinted at it, and held it up so the troopers could see. "This badge is from a novelty website. It's symbolic," she whispered. "It's illegal," he corrected. She turned ghost pale. "One deputy read my zip ties and cut them free." The moment the plastic snapped, Dixie strutted forward like a small, angry judge delivering a verdict. The sheriff nodded toward the HOA patrol. "All of you sit down, now." 20 people sat instantly. Marjorie remained standing, shaking not with fear, but with indignation. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "The HOA will stand against tyranny." Ray stepped forward, deadpan as ever. "Marjorie, the only tyranny here is whatever's going on in your clipboard." For a moment, everything was still. Then the sheriff said the words I'd been waiting to hear. "Patrol members, you are being detained pending investigation into impersonation of law enforcement, trespass, and attempted kidnapping." The HOA patrol collectively melted. Marjorie tried to bolt, but tripped over a tape measure and face-planted into a shrub. A trooper gently cuffed her while she recited HOA bylaws like they were constitutional amendments. Gary raised both hands and said, "Please arrest me, I'm so tired." They loaded the HOA patrol into cruisers. Marjorie kept shouting that the annex must be defended until the door closed. Ray looked at me and shook his head. "Cole, I swear, if you didn't live out here, my job would be boring." I clapped his shoulder. "Glad to help." He laughed once under his breath. "This isn't over, you know." I glanced toward the empty golf carts, the abandoned command tent, the shattered illusion of HOA power littered across my property. "Oh, I know," I said. "But today we won." Dixie nudged my leg, proud and smug. And as the cruisers pulled away with the defeated HOA patrol in tow, the desert sky glowed warm with sunrise. Justice looked good in that light. Ray stayed behind after the last cruiser rolled away. Standing in the pale morning dust with his thumbs hooked in his belt loops, he stared at the ruts left by the HOA convoy, then at the knocked-over plastic cones, then finally at me. His expression wasn't angry, not even annoyed. It was something worse, something like resignation. "Cole," he said, "I know a storm when I see one, and she ain't done." I rubbed the back of my neck. I figured, she's gonna regroup, probably spin this into some government suppression narrative. I snorted, pretty sure the only thing suppressed today was her dignity. Ray didn't smile. "You should come by the station later. Sheriff wants to talk about what charges you're filing." "Filing?" I lifted a brow. "Ray, I just want her to leave me alone. And I just want a quiet week," he replied. "But life doesn't give us what we want." He climbed into his cruiser and pulled away, leaving me alone in the dust with Dixie sniffing a crushed HOA clipboard like a bloodhound analyzing evidence. She nudged my boot, bleated once, and walked toward the barn, as if telling me to follow. I wish I could say the rest of that day was peaceful, But peace had been evicted from my property the moment Sunset Ridge set its sights on me. By noon, videos of the standoff had gone viral. Someone who'd been watching from the road had filmed everything from the HOA patrol's grand arrival to Marjorie being escorted into a cruiser while screeching about bylaws. And the internet had done what the internet does best, turned it into comedy. Memes flooded my phone, Dixie drawn as a superhero, Marjorie photoshopped onto a medieval battlefield, Gary labeled Reluctant Henchman of the Year. The whole thing would have been hilarious if it weren't about my land, my life, and people who refused to take a hint. But the strangest part came around 3 in the afternoon when Sheriff Hall called. "Cole," he began, voice heavier than usual. "We need you at the station. Bring everything you've got, paper notices, videos, screenshots, the works." "Why?" I asked. "Because Sunset Ridge just submitted a formal complaint. Against us?" I nearly dropped my phone. "You're kidding. Wish I was. What's the complaint?" "That we obstructed an HOA emergency operation and violated something called the Community Sovereignty Doctrine." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "That's not real." "No." The sheriff agreed, but they attached a 40-page packet arguing that it should be. I drove to the station with a binder full of absurdity letters, fake notices, pictures of golf carts, screenshots of HOA posts claiming victory over tyranny, Dixie Road shotgun for moral support. Sheriff Hall didn't question it. He just sighed. Inside, we gathered around a conference table. Hall, Ray, 2 deputies I recognized from the standoff, and me. The sheriff tapped a stack of papers. "This," he said, "is the most nonsense we've ever received, but nonsense becomes dangerous when people act on it." I nodded. "They think they have authority. They want authority," Hall corrected. "Big difference. And that makes them stubborn." Ray flipped through a document. "They've been sending emails to residents claiming they're forming a full-time HOA patrol, uniforms, training, even equipment." I leaned forward. "Equipment." He slid a paper to me. "A list. Items purchased by Sunset Ridge HOA, tactical belts, handheld radios, LED light bars, reflective vests, laminated IDs, and next to it, future equipment request, low-voltage deterrent devices, stun guns," I muttered. Ray nodded. "Looks that way." Sheriff Hall folded his arms. "We're opening a formal case, impersonation of officers, trespass, attempted unlawful detention. What do you need from me?" I asked. "Everything," he said simply. "Documentation, testimony, and your cooperation if this goes to court." I didn't hesitate. "You've got it." Ray closed his notebook. "Cole, brace yourself. They'll fight this." He wasn't wrong. When I drove home that evening, the desert sky glowing a deep, bruised orange, I found a surprise waiting on my porch. Gary. Or, more accurately, Gary sitting in the dust beside my porch, arms wrapped around his knees, staring into space like he'd seen 100 HOA bylaws crash and burn. He stood awkwardly when he saw me. "Mr. Matthews?" "Gary," I said. "You okay?" He opened his mouth, closed it again, then sighed. "I quit." "Finally?" I nodded. "Good choice. She called me a traitor," he muttered. "Said I'd betrayed the HOA creed." "There's a creed, apparently." I motioned toward the porch. "Want water?" He nodded gratefully. Dixie trotted up and sniffed him like a customs agent confirming identity. Gary drank half a bottle in one go. "Sir, you need to know something." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "Marjorie's not done. She's saying the sheriff's office is corrupt, that the HOA has to take matters into its own hands." I stared at him. "Gary," in English. He swallowed. "She's planning something big." That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the windmill, every distant coyote howl sounded like another HOA ambush. I wasn't scared not of them, but I knew what desperate people do when their fantasy of control collapses. They doubled down. By morning, the plan was clear in my mind. I needed to get ahead of them. While the sun was still low, I loaded Dixie into the passenger seat. She protested exactly once, grabbed my binder of evidence, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. Ray met me out front. "Good timing," he said, opening the door. "We just got something you need to see." Inside, he handed me a printed email. It was addressed to all HOA members from Marjorie. Subject, Operation Clean Sweep Restoring Order to Sunset Ridge North Annex. I read aloud. "Patrol will mobilize Friday morning. objective, secure compliance, detain hostile landowner until bylaws are acknowledged and signed. I stared at Ray. She's planning to kidnap me. She's planning to try, Ray corrected, and we're planning to be there when she does. How many units? I asked. Enough. That was all he said. That was all he needed to say. We spent the next hour building a plan, deputies stationed just out of sight, body cams rolling, troopers on standby, and a drone unit observing from above. All we needed was for the HOA patrol to take the bait. And by bait, I mean simply me standing on my own land. Ray's final words before I left were simple. Cole, don't engage, don't antagonize, just keep your phone recording and stall them. Ray, I said, you know who you're talking to? He cracked a tired smile. Unfortunately, yes. Driving home, I passed 2 parked cars near the Sunset Ridge plates. They ducked too fast, probably HOA scouts. They were coming, and this time, they thought they'd win. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly imagined, was that the real law, the real authority, and the real consequences were already waiting for them. And all I had to do was stay calm. Dixie bleated knowingly. Yeah, I said, patting her head, we're ready. The storm was coming, but for the first time, I felt steady, prepared, maybe even a little eager. After all, I wasn't the one about to get surrounded. I didn't sleep the night before it happened. Not a wink. I lay there listening to the desert shift and sigh outside my window, waiting for the first sign of movement. Dixie slept at the foot of my bed, occasionally twitching like she was dreaming of headbutting HOA volunteers. Honestly, I hoped she was. She'd need the practice. Ray's warning echoed in my skull on repeat. Friday morning. They're coming. Don't antagonize. Just stall. Stall. Easy for him to say. People like Marjorie don't show up casually. They arrive like hurricanes with noise, debris, and a complete disregard for property values. By dawn, I was already outside, leaning on the fence with a mug of coffee, scanning the horizon for dust clouds. The sky was a gentle purple, the kind that always made me grateful to live far. Far away from cul-de-sacs and matching mailboxes. I wished I could enjoy it. But then I heard it. Not engines yet, radios. Dozens of them. Static, crackling, murmurs. Then, engines. Lots of engines. And then, the lights. Flashing amber bars cresting the ridge like the opening act of a very poorly organized apocalypse. I muttered, "Showtime, Dixie." She bleated, head-butted the gate once, and trotted beside me like a furry deputy. They came in harder this time. Not cautious, not scattered, but formation, like they'd rehearsed for a week. 4 HOA SUVs, 2 golf carts with mounted flags, a rented moving truck labeled Patrol Unit Mobile Command, and, behind them, a flatbed trailer carrying a giant foldable tent and what looked suspiciously like a podium. A podium. Who brings a podium to a ranch confrontation? The HOA? Apparently. The convoy screeched to a stop right in my driveway, tires skidding in dust. Dust swallowed the morning light, doors flew open, radios squawked, lanyards swung. It looked like a suburban SWAT team, but with significantly less competence and significantly more khaki. Marjorie stepped out last. She wore a new sash today, royal blue, trimmed with gold fringe, emblazoned with the title, Supreme Enforcement Officer, Sunset Ridge Compliance Corps. Compliance Corps, I couldn't help whispering. Oh, good grief. She caught sight of me and marched forward with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned what consequences were. "Cole Matthews," she shouted, bullhorn raised. "You are in direct violation of the emergency compliance mandate." I lifted my coffee. "Haven't even violated my caffeine limit yet, Marjorie." She ignored that. Patrol members fanned out behind her, lining up like a discount honor guard. Every one of them had a metal badge, tactical belt, and a holster holding, thank God, only a bright-colored training taser. Still dangerous, but at least not lethal. One of the men, mid-50s, tall, sunburned, unfolded a large laminated scroll with exaggerated drama. "Under Article 12, he declared, "we hereby demand your immediate compliance." "Article 12 of what?" I asked, he faltered. "The regulations." "What regulations?" "Oh," he said softly, looking down. "The ones she wrote." I choked on my coffee. Marjorie raised her bullhorn again. "Patrol unit, detain the subject." 4 HOA members rushed me. Ray had warned me, don't engage. Stall. So I kept my voice calm as their hands grabbed my arms. Folks, I said, you understand this is kidnapping, right? It's emergency detention, one replied shakily. It's illegal detention, I corrected. Big difference. Another man, short, round, panting, held a pair of plastic restraints. We don't want to hurt you, sir. Just comply. Sir, I said, yesterday I was a threat to community harmony. Today I get, sir, no offense intended. I sighed. You're all idiots. But I didn't resist. I let them hold me. Let them believe they had control. Let them think the plan was working. Because behind the barn, behind the hill, behind the dusty ridgeline, waiting, watching, silent was Ray, and the sheriff, and the state troopers. They were waiting for the signal, the moment the HOA patrol moved from trespassing idiots to idiots committing crimes. When the restraints touched my skin, that was the moment. I heard the radios first, sheriff units switching channels, troopers confirming positions, then the sound I'd been waiting for. Sirens, real ones, deep, commanding, impossible to ignore. Marjorie froze mid-sentence. The HOA patrol froze mid-kidnapping. Then, like a scene from a movie, sheriff cruisers burst over the ridge in a perfect arc. 4 of them, lights blazing red and blue. 2 trooper sedans followed from the opposite direction, engines rumbling low and angry. They surrounded the HOA convoy with mathematical precision. Marjorie's face drained of color. Gary sank to his knees. One HOA member whispered, I didn't sign up for this. Another whispered back, you literally signed up for this. Dixie bleated triumphantly. Sheriff Hall stepped out of the lead cruiser, hand resting on his holster, eyes narrowed. Good morning, folks, he said. This looks interesting. Marjorie regained a shred of bravado. Sheriff Hall, you are interfering with an authorized compliance operation. No, he said evenly. I'm stopping a kidnapping. She sputtered. This is a lawful detention. On someone else's private land, Ray added calmly. One deputy approached the guy holding the plastic restraints. Sir, drop the zip ties. He did. Immediately, hands shaking. Dixie headbutted his shin for good measure. Sheriff Hall faced Marjorie. Ma'am, you have repeatedly been warned. You do not have jurisdiction here. You do not have authority here. You do not have the legal right to impersonate officers, detain citizens, or enforce fictional regulations. Marjorie clutched her clipboard to her chest. They're not fictional. Ray lifted a laminated page from her stack. This one cites Article 7, Stand Your Lawn. She straightened proudly. A foundational principle. It is nonsense, Ray replied. It is righteous. It is going to get you arrested. That shut her up. The sheriff motioned, and deputies began separating HOA members, questioning them, taking statements. Some resisted, some cried, some said, I told her this was a bad idea. Louder and louder as the minutes went on. Gary stood alone, staring at the ground. A deputy approached him. Sir, are you part of this operation? Gary shook his head immediately. I'm part of nothing. I renounce everything. Please take me somewhere quiet. The deputy blinked. You're renouncing the HOA? Gary nodded vigorously. Yes, forever, please. The deputy gently sat him on the back bumper of a cruiser and gave him a bottle of water. Meanwhile, Marjorie tried one last desperate attempt to salvage her imaginary empire. This is an overreach, she screamed. The HOA will prevail. You can't silence us, Sheriff Hall sighed. Ma'am, you're not being silenced. You're being arrested. Her eyes widened. Arrested. Me. For impersonating an officer, Ray clarified. And for attempted unlawful detention, the sheriff added. And for trespassing, a trooper chimed in. And probably reckless stupidity, I muttered. Everyone heard it. Even Dixie nodded. 2 deputies approached and gently but firmly cuffed Marjorie. She tried to recite HOA regulations as if they were constitutional rights, but the deputies didn't care. They placed her in the back of the sheriff's cruiser next to a stack of confiscated clipboards. The door shut. Silence fell across the ranch. A good silence, a victorious silence. Ray walked over to me and clapped my shoulder. Told you we'd handle it, didn't doubt you, I said. He gave me a tired grin. Cole, this whole thing, it's gonna go down in county legend. Dixie bleated in agreement. I looked around at the emptying patrol units, the abandoned golf carts, the podium still strapped to the flatbed like a fallen monument to suburban delusion. "Ray," I said, "you think this is really the end of it?" His smile faded. "No. There'll be court, there'll be paperwork, there'll be fallout." He paused, glancing toward the road where the HOA patrol had been hauled away. "And knowing her, she'll try something else, something stupid." I nodded slowly. "So, we prepare?" He nodded back. "We prepare?" As the cruisers rolled away, leaving only dust and silence behind, Dixie pressed her head into my leg. I looked down at her. "Good job today." She bleated softly. We both knew it. The war wasn't over yet, but for now, we'd won the battle. When the sheriff's convoy disappeared over the ridge and the dust finally settled into the warm evening air, the ranch felt different. Not just quieter, lighter, somehow, like the land itself had been holding its breath while the HOA patrol acted out their suburban fever dream. And now it could finally exhale. I walked the property line slowly, half expecting another HOA drone to rise out of a shrub and start live streaming. Old habits die hard. Dixie followed at my heel, still riding the high of her morning victory like a championship boxer. Every few minutes she'd stop, sniff a broken clipboard, and bleat proudly before trotting on. Her legend was growing, and I swear she knew it. Inside the barn, the goats were settled and calm. The horses grazed peacefully. The chickens pecked at the ground like they hadn't just witnessed the strangest hostage situation in county history. Life on the ranch wanted to return to normal, chore by chore, breath by breath. But I knew this wasn't over. HOAs don't surrender gracefully. They don't step down quietly. They regroup, reorganize, rewrite their bylaws, and return with new fonts and worse ideas. And Marjorie Blake, she wasn't the type to learn lessons. As the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky a deep orange, I heard the crunch of familiar footsteps coming up the drive. I didn't need to look. Ray Delgado walked with a particular rhythm, half weary, half unbothered, like he'd accepted his career would forever include goats, angry homeowners, and paperwork that defied logic. "Evanin, Cole," he called. "Evanin, deputy." He climbed the porch steps, nodding to Dixie, who gave him a slow, deliberate bleat of approval. "That goat," Ray muttered, "should be on the county seal. I'll bring it up at the next commissioner meeting." Ray sat heavily on the porch railing. "We got most of the HOA statements filed. Some of those patrol members were real cooperative once they realized impersonating a cop is a felony. Even Gary," I asked. "No charges for him. He's harmless." "Honestly, he seems traumatized," I snorted softly. "You'd be traumatized too if you spent 2 weeks following Marjorie into battle." Ray chuckled once, then took a deep breath. "Court date's coming. You'll need to testify. The DA wants this airtight." "I'll be there," he nodded. "Sheriff Hall says the county's drafting a new ordinance, something to prevent this nonsense from happening again. They naming it after Dixie?" I asked. Ray grinned. "Funny you mention that." The day of the court hearing came faster than I expected. Small county courtroom, plastic chairs, a judge who looked like he regretted not retiring 5 years earlier, and packed rows of locals who showed up because the whole county had been talking about the HOA takeover fiasco for a week. Dixie came too, wearing a tiny vest someone had gifted her. It read, "Emotional Support Goat." I don't know who made it, but it fit her personality like a crown fits a queen. I sat beside Ray at the front. Across the aisle sat the remains of the HOA patrol. Nervous, quiet, dressed like people who had just realized they weren't freedom fighters, but confused volunteers in matching khaki shorts. And then there was Marjorie. She walked in with the solemnity of a dethroned monarch, chin lifted, eyes glazed with righteous indignation. She wore a blazer over her new sash, and she clutched a thick binder titled, "The Core Institution of Sunset Ridge, Restoring Order in a Disordered World," Comic Sans, glossy cover, tabs sticking out in every direction like angry little tongues. When the judge took the bench, the room fell silent. "Court is now in session," he muttered. "God help us." The prosecution began. They played Ray's body cam footage. They presented the emails about Operation Clean Sweep. They projected the HOA's fake detention order on the wall. The courtroom erupted into muffled laughter when the judge asked calmly, "Mrs. Blake, what exactly is Article 7? Stand your lawn?" Marjorie stood proudly. "It is a doctrine empowering homeowners to defend their community standards against hostile environmental threats." The judge pinched his nose. "Ma'am, that is not anything." Then it was my turn. I testified about the trespassing, the attempted detentions, the fake maps, the surveillance van, the TikTok streaming teen, the golf cart invasion, the podium on the flatbed trailer, the laminated badge that literally said "Patrol Officer" in curling font. I tried to keep a straight face, mostly succeeded. Then came the moment the courtroom would never forget. The prosecutor pressed play on the viral video, the one where Dixie launched herself into an HOA sign, flipping it into the air like a championship wrestler. The entire courtroom, judge included, burst into laughter. Even one of the troopers snorted. Dixie bleated proudly. Then, because fate is sometimes a comedian, the video replayed in slow motion, twice. By the time it ended, Marjorie looked like she might spontaneously combust. When it was her turn to speak, she rose slowly, rested one trembling hand on her binder, and declared, "I was acting in defense of our community's values." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "By invading private land, the land was spiritually part of our community," she insisted. "Spiritually," the prosecutor repeated, "not legally. That is your interpretation." The judge let out the deepest sigh I've ever heard from a human being. After closing statements, he didn't deliberate long. "Mrs. Blake," he said, adjusting his glasses, "your HOA has no jurisdiction beyond its subdivision. None. You cannot annex private land. You cannot form a patrol. You cannot impersonate officers. You cannot detain a man on his own ranch. And you cannot enforce bylaws you invented in Comic Sans." Someone in the back snorted so loudly the deputy glared at them. "I hereby issue a cease and desist order," the judge continued. "Sunset Ridge HOA is barred from any enforcement attempt outside its legally recorded boundaries. Mrs. Blake, you are forbidden from contacting Mr. Matthews or entering his property." And finally, he lifted the binder. "This document is not legally binding, spiritually binding, aesthetically binding, or binding in any imaginable sense." He slammed it shut. Case closed. The room exhaled. Locals cheered. Reporters rushed forward. Dixie trotted in triumphant circles like she was giving a victory lap. Marjorie stormed out of the courtroom, binder clutched like a wounded animal, muttering, "This isn't over," but it was over, at least for now. 2 weeks passed. Sunset Ridge retreated into silence. HOA meetings shrank, patrol members resigned, neighbors whispered about the downfall of Marjorie Blake like it was a local legend. Then the county commissioners announced a new ordinance, the Dixie Clause. It stated, "No HOA shall extend, imply, or enforce authority beyond its legally recorded subdivision boundaries. Violations are subject to misdemeanor charges and civil penalties." The day it passed, Dixie's bleat played on the recording. I didn't cry. You cried. People from all over the county drove to take pictures with the new sign I put up at the entrance to my ranch. "Welcome to Matthews Ranch. No HOA beyond this point." A barbecue joint in town added a new menu item, Dixie's Freedom Ribs. Kids asked for pictures with her. Tourists asked for tours. Someone tried to book her for a commercial. Life settled into something easy again. Real easy. Until the night Ronald showed up. He stood at the gate, holding a duffel bag and looking like a man who'd finally escaped a cult. "She kicked me out," he said. "Said I betrayed the HOA cause." "You want a job?" I asked. He nodded. "I want a life. Cabin's empty," I told him. "Breakfast at 6. He wiped his eyes. "Thank you." The ranch healed, the land breathed. People stopped driving by to see the famous goat who defeated an HOA. Well, not everyone stopped, because one evening, as the sun bled orange across the hills and I sat by the fire pit with Ray, Ronald on guitar, and Dixie perched proudly on a hay bale, something stirred on the road. An engine, slow, creeping, cautious. Ray squinted. "You expecting someone?" "No," I said. Nope. The vehicle rolled closer, a familiar shape, a familiar silhouette, a minivan, and then soft, but unmistakable, the crisp snap of a clipboard opening. Dixie's ears shot up. Ray groaned. Ronald whimpered. I stood, dusted off my jeans, cracked my knuckles, and stared into the setting sun. Here we go again. In the middle of all the chaos, one truth kept coming back to me. Freedom isn't just about owning land. It's about defending your right to live the life you've built. People will always show up with clipboards, opinions, or imaginary authority, trying to reshape your world into theirs, but boundaries matter. Standing your ground matters. And knowing when to call in help, whether it's a friend, a deputy, or a goat with excellent aim matters too. At the end of the day, peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict, it comes from having the courage to face it, protect what's yours, and refuse to let unreasonable people define your life for you. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or a neighbor who acted like one? And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss the next wild HOA showdown.